Okay. Tashtile Samala, Dojiden Samdi Shuyu, Perans Lubu Sobagi, Tethong Lesson, Yushiwa Chagi, Tiringi Tethong Lesson, the Manzu Inge Tolai, and Inge Nane to go to Chuash. Okay. Hi everyone, welcome everyone to SFT Live episode 14. My name is Dojit Setan, Executive Director of Students for Free Tibet. I'm coming live from New York. We had a number of interesting discussion on earlier episodes, but those were in Tibetan. But this episode we are having discussion in English. And as we know that coronavirus, which originated in Wuhan, China, has now become a global pandemic. As the global debt rises relentlessly and growing number of countries are rethinking their relationship with China and calling for the accountability of the Chinese government. So today's discussion, I am truly honored to have this opportunity to host three most amazing and inspiring activists and leaders from our movement who has been working tirelessly promoting human rights and freedom for Uyghurs, Tibetans, and Hong Kongers, and as well as human rights and democracy in China. So we are going to discuss today about how China's party state endangers the world, and most importantly, what we can do about it. And we will also discuss about how this global pandemic has affected China, its occupied territories, including Tibet and East Turkestan, and also all over the world. So without taking much time, I will now introduce our three amazing speakers. So first, we have Rushan Abbas from Uyghur Movement. Rushan is the director of Campaigns for Uyghur. She has started her activism when she was a student participating in student democracy demonstration at Xinjiang University in 1985 and 1988. Rushan arrived in US in 1989 and since then has been actively campaigning for the human rights and freedom of the Uyghur people and frequently briefs US lawmakers and various government and leaders around the world on human rights situation in East Turkestan. So thank you, Rushan, for joining us. Next, we have Sharon Home from Human Rights in China. Sharon leads human rights in China, human rights and media advocacy, as well as strategic policy engagement with NGOs and government. Sharon has taught law for 18 years, including training judges, lawyers, and law teachers at 8 schools in China over 14-year period in 1980s and 90s. She was also named one of the 50 women to watch by Wall Street Journal in 2007. As we also know, because of her advocacy and campaign for for the Hong Kong movement, she has been named as the auntie of Hong Kong's protest movement. And she also recently participated our 10 March Tibetan National Uprising Day in New York, and she spoke there at the crowd of over 1,000 Tibetans at the march. So thank you, Sharon, for joining. And finally, we have Lhadon Tethong. Lhadon Tethong is the leading figure of the Tibetan freedom movement who has continuously inspired hundreds and thousands of Tibetan youth and activists around the world, including myself, with her steadfast leadership and strategic thinking. She is currently the director of Tibet Action Institute. She has traveled the world building powerful nonviolent movement for Tibet's freedom and leading innovative economic and political campaigns against China's rule in Tibet. She also served as the executive director of SFT, where I work right now. And in 2019, Lhadon accepted Democracy Award from the National Endowment for Democracy on behalf of Tibet Action Institute. So I am truly honored and inspired to meet all of you here. So yeah, I just want to check. It's been a difficult time. As much as it is challenging for the movement, there are a lot of opportunities, but as well as like individually, we have been locked down for a number of days. So just want to check out because it's been after a while that we are having this opportunity to speak. So how are you guys doing? Rushan is right now based in DC, right?
Yes,
How are you, Rushan?
doing good, thanks. Working from home, trying to utilize our time. Basically, we brought the battlefield to home and the social media and the internet and websites. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, I think you were saying you were much more even busy nowadays than like before the quarantine. I mean, I've been following your work. It's amazing. So yeah, I'm happy to know that you are fine. So how are you, Ladula, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. I'm always working from home mostly, so that hasn't changed. I recently had twins, so I have newborn twins and a toddler. So my life has been very much focused on children lately, which has been a great blessing, and also is, as any of the parents know out there, can be a little bit stressful. But I am grateful to have a home and the safety and security of this place, to be able to ride out the pandemic and also hopefully contribute something back, through my work, which I'll be returning to shortly.
Thanks, Ladula. I'm really happy to have you here. I know you must be busy with your kids, but even then you managed to take out time.
No, thank
That's
you.
amazing. And Sharon, we are in New York, and I know New York is the epicenter for the national disaster. I know a lot of people are concerned, so I'm really happy that you are fine. Your team, Human Rights in China team, are doing fine.
Yes, as you know, many of our team, we live in the epicenter of the epicenter, so Queens. And so all of us have been under, not quite lockdown, but we've been working from home for now almost more than 2 months. But everyone, I think our team is keeping pretty good spirits. Ironically, working harder than when we were actually going in and out of the office because we now have no commuting time, and so we just work the whole time. But it's just wonderful to join you, and it's wonderful to see Lhadon and Rushan, like two women that I find really inspiring and wonderful, and it's just such an honor to be with the two of them. For the people following us on Facebook, I know a lot of people are interested in my 13 cats and the dog, so I will apologize because I can't control them because they're cats. And they tend to get interested if I'm doing things like this. So they might see some of them just walk by.
Yep. Thank you, Sharon. So I know you guys have been like working at the forefront. There are a lot of things to share, but as we discussed earlier, we're going to also focus on what we can do. I mean, everyone realized that this is such a challenging time, but unique time, and a lot of opportunities as well for the movement. But what we can do as a movement leader. So there are a lot of things that we're going to cover. At the moment, in between, I have to look on my phone to check the live, and if there's any comments or questions for the people. So we're going to take this program for, let's say, like 1 hour 15 minutes, and we're gonna first spend like maybe like 30 minutes to answer a couple of questions, and then we're gonna take questions from people. So we have right now 141 live viewers, so that is really good. We want to thank everyone for joining. There are some comments like free is Turkestan, free Tibet, and someone said Tashi Delek to all of you guys. Yeah, and then like someone is wishing Ladula as well here. So I think a lot of comments are coming out. And so yeah, to begin with, I would now want to ask everyone to open up with your opening like remark or whatever like you have been working on, and overall view your thought on the current situation. So let's start with Rushan.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to join this session. Thank you for giving me the platform. First of all, I would like to say Ramadan Mubarak to all the Muslims in this holy month of Islam. Today is the second Friday. Actually, we started last Friday. If we talk about the current situation, the genocide Uyghurs are facing today, conducted by the Chinese Communist regime, is known amongst our communities. Like you know, that we know, but we need to make it a global common knowledge. Still, because of the information blockade by the Chinese government, it's not very known, especially among the grassroots organizations. China has been using the Nazi-like techniques to exterminate Uyghurs and the other Turkic Muslims while convincing the world that they are placing them in this so-called vocational training centers and getting away with it. If you have watched the recently released PBS the Frontline documentary, China Undercover, it reveals a dialogue between a local Chinese official in Urumqi. It really stuck to my head, actually. This is the real reality, just spelling it out clearly. He says, Uyghurs don't have human rights, so it's not about violating them. They just don't have any rights. I think this is the reality for Tibetans and the people in Hong Kong as well right now. If we look back last 6 months, there were 3 sets of the Chinese government's leaked documents, which provided the unprecedented inside view of the Chinese government's racially targeted hatred and brutality toward the Uyghurs. And these documents also revealed Xi Jinping's ability to deceive the international community about the nature of the camps and the brutal policies in East Turkestan. Just in the same way, the CCP has been misleading and continue to mislead the world about the COVID-19. It's China's authoritarian narrative and continuing to denying the truth, to keep quiet and misinform and to punish whistleblowers. Taking a security crackdown approach is what turned this epidemic from Wuhan now became a global pandemic. Chinese Communist Party is responsible for those thousands of lives are being lost globally today. And this pandemic has revealed China's true intentions in wanting economic and political domination on a global scale. And this means that they are a threat to all societies, the Uyghurs, Tibetans, and the Hong Kongers. Warned the world about China's manipulation and the unimaginable vicious behavior and their objective to undermine the rule of law as well as their malicious impotence for humanity, which would bring disaster to the Western democracy. And now currently, if you look at this virus pandemic is dominating the most of the media coverages, and the politicians' priorities have shifted and has the global communities the global community's attention. Meanwhile, the CCP is using this time to aggressively execute crimes against humanity in our homeland. It's very painful and disappointing to watch the idleness of the world community as the Uyghurs become a human collateral for China's economic aggression and manipulation. Concurrently, now they are buying the silence of democratic world leaders, Muslim majority countries, key politicians, the media, and Hollywood, and the influential business people. The Amazon's recent decision, if you look at a few days ago, to purchase products from Dawei, a company that blacklisted by the US government for providing surveillance equipment used against the Uyghurs, is yet another hugely disappointing example of this. With that, not only has the world turned a blind eye to this horrific treatments of the Uyghurs, but it still also continues to praise China for the crisis that they started. The CCP orchestrated a successful COVID-19 PR campaign China's hiding behind the cracking facade, which portrays them as humanitarians while profiting off of a faulty medical equipment and the medical supplies which they sold to foreign countries. Had people listened and heeded to those calls, put pressure on China and they challenged its behavior and held China accountable and take necessary precautions against this virus would have been taken, and the loss of lives would be lower today. The West and the international community must think twice before they pursue any economic cooperation with China. So what actions can be taken against the imprehensible evil that pursues the Uyghurs, Tibetans, and the citizens of Hong Kong, and now being a danger and a threat to the whole world community, and might likewise to continue to take a route across the globe. First, we must unite together in a mutual support for all communities who have been marginalized and abused by the CCP. We need to make it clear to the world that we are not isolated groups of people just aimlessly pursuing our own agendas. We are people united in a cause, in the cause of common human decency, who are struggling against the government that denies all people's right to live the lives of dignity by setting themselves as the only voice people are allowed to listen to, by denying all of our voices. The CCP, the Chinese Communist regime, has set themselves up as an enemy of all humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Rushan, for the amazing opening remark. I want to acknowledge the work that you have been doing, and people, the Uyghur people who are suffering right now. We share a lot of common challenges, but at the same time, I want to acknowledge your work and the resistance of Uyghur people in East Turkestan and around the world gives hope. And I just want to I realize, as you said, it's the month of Ramadan Mubarak. I just want to say Ramadan Mubarak to you and all the Uyghur brothers and sisters. And then we will follow up further on some of the points you mentioned in terms of what actions we can take. So next, I would now request Sharon. Sharon, you have been working with the human rights and democracy for people of Hong Kong, and not only that, you have been working for the whole human rights campaign in China for many, many years. And we would like to hear, and I know you are right now currently monitoring the situation in Hong Kong as well, even though people are, lost or in the whole coronavirus situation, there are still repression and crackdown happening in Hong Kong. Many prominent activists recently been arrested. So can you please give us a overall update on your take on all the situation happening in China and Hong Kong?
Thank you so much, and thank you, Rushan, that the opening up so broadly and mapping such a great tee off for all of us. You've really hit all of the issues in one opening set of remarks. Let me maybe perhaps just begin with a very quick update. I think everyone has been following the developments since April, when the arrest of the 15 pro-democracy important leaders and activists, including former legislative counselors, including very prominent barristers, including Martin Lee, who is affectionately and respectfully referred to as the father of democracy in Hong Kong, and including youth leaders. And so this was really sending out a very big message that they were intensifying what had been a slowly building up pressure on Hong Kong's autonomy, on Hong Kong's rights and freedoms, and on obviously undermining the whole one country, two system that was promised. So that intensification is happening not coincidentally with COVID-19. So the central government or Beijing's efforts to control Hong Kong is not new. They started well before the handover 1997, building it in. And then after 1997, it's been almost 2 decades of Beijing trying to introduce patriotic education, trying to undermine the promised universal suffrage. And most recently in the anti-extradition law demonstrations and movement, which continues, it was Beijing who was really condoning the violent state-condoned use of force by the law enforcement. And they also stood by watching the triads in illegal use of force. So all of this is not new. But what is new is that now, in the context of COVID-19 clearly becoming a global pandemic, is that they're using the cover of it to try to redirect the attention with a story. And it's a story of, it's the narrative from Beijing, and that we're a victim too. And that, you know, they're trying to move it away from how it started, their responsibility, how it could have been, as Rushan said, could have been stopped much sooner if it weren't for information control. And it's also alarming that Beijing and the party state's approach to it has been referred to in the media and by governments, including Western democratic governments, saying perhaps in the time of a global pandemic, the authoritarian model is a necessary evil, saying that maybe now, we may need to do it that way to control a pandemic. So that's very dangerous. And then the third part of that China's using to ride, their narrative is to say, we're part of the solution. We're looking for the vaccine. We are, and they're engaging in masks diplomacy, sending masks, and the governments who are receiving them with open arms and being very grateful really need to be very cautious, not only about the quality of the mask, but really, about the Trojan horse part of that gift. So I think the way in which the Chinese party state is using the COVID-19 to both exacerbate the human rights, like what is happening in East Turkestan and in Tibet, intensifying the repression, and clearly now coming out from behind the curtains in Hong Kong. We always knew who was the puppet master, and who was actually just following orders from Beijing. But now the puppet master has come out and stood wide open and said, we're in control here. We can tell Hong Kong people what to do. We are the ones who will ensure that it's one country, almost one system. So I think the violations of the camps, the forced labor, the repression, that the cultural, religious, linguistic repression that is happening, all of this has been intensified. And in Hong Kong, the attack on rule of law and freedoms has intensified. And what I want to do to open up our discussion later is 2 points. One is that these violations for Hong Kong and for the other issues are mass violations of international human rights obligations of the Chinese government, but it's also in Hong Kong, mass violations, blatant violations of the Hong Kong SAR government's obligations under the ICCPR and also under its international obligations. So that's one. The second thing is that all of these tactics of control and repression are against our different peoples and our different communities are all from the same authoritarian playbook. And that's because in the past, these tactics worked, and now to some extent are still working. That's why it's outrageous that millions disappeared into camps and relatives are still saying we can't find them. It's outrageous that we now have still thousands now going through the system of the, subject to the violence of the police violence, and now these arrests are exacerbating. So all of this is part of the same playbook, and I wanted to echo Rushan that when we think about what we can do, there's a we that's us as in solidarity, and then there's we separately in our communities that must strategize more effectively, because I think this moment is actually different. I think this moment, because of the COVID-19, that the pandemic is now hitting home everywhere in the world. And it's doing two things. It's making governments, and in some cases businesses, realize that, and it's all happening simultaneously, that they're still being bought out, they're still being complicit, as Rushan pointed out, but at the same time, there is a moment now where businesses are saying maybe our global chain, supply chain model needs to be, let's think about that. And I think governments are thinking, maybe when we turned our eye and for other national interests of each government, whether it's economic or security, maybe now it's time to pay the bill, that the harm will come to us if we allow an authoritarian regime to continue running amok, in violation of law and norms and rule of law, that sooner or later, they can't just say, well, it's just going to be the Uyghurs, it's just going to be the dissidents, it's just going to be the people, the democracy, the people in Hong Kong that's protein. So I think this is a moment where the fault lines are beginning to appear, and you're seeing things that we would not have seen as now, where you're seeing the Australian government actually say we need an independent inquiry into police violence in Hong Kong. You're seeing certain Scandinavian governments closing down Confucius Institutes. You're seeing universities that are quite prominent closing down Confucius Institutes. And that is not just accidental either. It's also because SFT has done a tremendous campaign on Confucius Institute. But it does show the convergence of each sector, the governments, the business, everyone, the media are seeing when they're being kicked out of China, that this regime is a threat to everyone and to freedoms for everyone. And so the last thing I just want to share quickly is, because it's happening now, is that yesterday in Hong Kong, that is May 1st in Hong Kong, the Confederation of Trade Union had earlier applied for what we call a letter of no objection. That is, you don't apply for a permit, you apply for the police to issue a letter of no objection, so they could go forth on a march on May 1st. And they had negotiated, and they had put in conditions that we will do the social distancing 1.5 meters apart. We'll do 4 in a row in the street, like 4 apart. And the application was denied. And then yesterday, May 1st, in Hong Kong, a group protested, and they brought out dozens of police for a very small group who were protesting the fact that the letter of no objection was not issued. And then also the other side of it is that Joshua Wong and union members, there's a huge unionization movement going on in Hong Kong as well. And they also set up 60 street stations to recruit 10,000 recruiting leaflets to be distributed. And for that small group who had set up these booths, over 50 police officers came out, although there were only 4 people at the booth. So you can see both two things: the extent of the police law enforcement excessive deployment of force. But the second thing I think it exposes, just like it exposes in Beijing, what's happening now is, and we can't miss this opportunity, it's exposing the vulnerability of those in power. It's exposing the vulnerability, because you would only have to feel terribly vulnerable to call out 50 police for a small group. You'd have to feel and in our strategic thinking, we need to really be really carefully, strategically monitoring and then using what COVID-19 has exposed in the vulnerability of the party state governance and in the vulnerability of Xi Jinping himself, because a lot of this happened because he concentrated and controlled power in his own hands. And therefore, when he did that, and he wasn't paying attention at the beginning, he was that when it really started exploding in the first couple of weeks, they didn't respond fast enough. So Chinese people on the mainland got a lot of information before it shut down. And that underneath layer of fury and anger at what the authorities did by withholding information that caused the deaths, and the efforts to still remember Dr. Li Wenliang is all underneath. And so we should not see it as a lockdown situation for civil society and for the people and for activists. I think my key message is that in many different ways, that in Hong Kong, which has been described by recently as it's an era-defining struggle, because Hong Kong is so small and so tiny, and it's standing up and showing the possibility that we can stand up to one of the most powerful authoritarian regimes in history. And so we need to be supporting the Hong Kong local efforts. And then I think we need to recognize the commonality in our struggles. And because those tactics of repression are being used on all of us in different ways. So I'll just end there.
Thank you, Sharon, for the amazing, update and opening. So next, I would like now to request Lhadon. Tibetan movement has been experiencing what world is now experiencing for over decades, right? Tibet has been occupied over 70 years, and we have been trying to tell the world. Nobody was listening, but now things are changing. It seems like the world is becoming more cautious. So Lhadon, based on your experience, you had worked in the movement for over the last 20 years. And with your experience, what change you are seeing both inside China, Tibet, and in the world?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Setenla, and Rushan and Sharon. Thank you so much for being an inspiration to me, and also just for you're both steadfast, tireless in the truest sense of the word, advocates, activists, troublemakers for the Beijing regime. And I just, it's a great honor to share this platform with you and to know you and to work with you. Thanks to everybody who is, tuned in, watching from home. We're all in, very similar position, at least on this side of the world right now. And it's just I'm sort of, even just sitting here, getting my thoughts together and listening to you, I'm just taken by what an unprecedented moment this is. How that China is, in this way, center stage to this global conversation, whether or not we all agree, and whether or not governments and media and people are holding the Chinese party state, Xi Jinping and his cronies, all of them, to account in the ways that we would like them to be held accountable. Just the simple fact that China's authoritarian system has allowed this virus to be, in a way, unleashed on the world, and that we're all in this position, and that it's touching every single person, is crazy. Because from our perspective, and I would say as Tibetans, but also as Uyghurs and Chinese citizens and Hong Kongers and people who have been fighting against this regime in Beijing for so long, and being subjugated and oppressed and targeted so viciously and violently for some of us for so long, to be, now in this situation where that has gone global, whether directly or indirectly, however you want to say it, that we're seeing now the impact and the direct, the sort of the dangerous spread of a life and death situation far beyond our own, the borders of Tibet or the borders of East Turkestan or China or Hong Kong. It's remarkable. And I think one thing that strikes me right now is this tension. So as a Tibetan, with my family and my friends, listening to the radio, watching the news at night, engaging in, activism at this time, it's incredibly difficult. It's painful, actually, to see how, the Chinese government is trying to use this moment and how they want to, as Sharon said, engage in the mass diplomacy, and people at some point singing the praises of how they responded and so well contained, the outbreak in China. All of that is extremely painful to hear and to watch, because we know the true face of this regime. We know why, in a way, this got out of hand in the first place, and there's so little that we can do practically in this moment. It feels like, to sort of get people to focus on that. Now that makes sense to me because, of course, of the emergency is happening. The house is on fire. The world is on fire in this way. And everybody is focused on putting out the fire, rightly so. There's imminent danger, sickness and death to the entire international community right now. So people are focused on that and that response, and that, for obvious reasons. But when you look at, from our perspective, it's like insult to injury. It's injustice upon injustice for Tibetans inside Tibet to watch this, for Tibetans, in exile and around the world, to see how we know what this is about, where it comes from. Of course, global pandemics could start anywhere, but in this particular case, the lack of transparency, the closed system, the repression and suppression of not just whistleblowers, but of anybody, any citizen who wants to talk about this, who wants to share best practices or help people stay safe. Anyone, any citizen, anyone trying to do that, any Tibetan trying to do that, share information online is targeted or can be held accountable, can be disappeared, can be arrested and harassed, and the very nature of the Chinese authoritarian system in this moment is just doubly and triply painful. If you look at, just from where I am here in the United States, I feel, I'm always thinking about people inside Tibet who suddenly have to kind of go quiet, and they're not supposed to share information, and they're not supposed to do exactly those things that we're all doing here to keep our families and our communities and ourselves safe. We're all trying to understand, how does this virus work? How does it spread? Where is it? Who has it? What do we do to safeguard ourselves? And it's just, it's outrageous. It's, such a crime that in Tibet and in China and in Hong Kong and in other places under, the Beijing regime in East Turkestan, that people are so far from having, basic human rights, let alone this basic right to safeguard themselves and their community from getting sick. And so there's this always, for me, there's just this feeling of the injustice piled upon the injustice of a moment like this, and a deep sense of awareness, for Tibetans inside Tibet, how, frustrating it must be. That's a very weak word, but to watch this all unfolding and to watch the whole world being threatened, global security, to watch Tibetans and have to know of Tibetans in New York, dying and being sickened and being, losing livelihoods because of this virus that really should never have gotten out of control like this, at a minimum. And so in Tibet, obviously, everybody I think on this call knows, but the situation is just, what we wouldn't give to know really what's happening on the ground. I mean, the lockdown in Tibet has been so thorough and so complete since 2008 in the March uprising, in the lead up to the Olympic Games, since that time and beyond, that it's like an information black hole. And Freedom House actually, just for sadly, the 5th year running, had put out their report on their index of freedom in the world, and Tibet again is number 2 least free place on earth when you look at civil and political rights. And, you know, when people ask me, how is this affecting Tibet? What do we know about what's happening in Tibet? Well, very little. I mean, truly very little. This is what always strikes me when I'm preparing for a talk or a presentation or an interview or something on the situation, that the repression in Tibet is so complete, and the Chinese government has done such a thorough job of locking foreigners and media and people out and threatening and scaring Tibetans inside, that what little we do know about what's happening inside comes out only because people risk themselves to send out information, maybe via WeChat or through some family member or some online posts. I know there's great concern right now in Tibet for the state of, especially for Tibetans. So many Tibetans are in prison. There are so many Tibetan political prisoners, people who have been disappeared, people who are serving sentences for nothing more than, saying long live the Dalai Lama, or for trying to just practice religion or exercise their basic language rights as guaranteed under the Chinese constitution. So you talk here about prisoners being released because of the threat of coronavirus. You talk about, mass prisoner releases in some cases. And inside Tibet, we have all of these heroes in the prisons, and we don't know what the situation is. We can only assume the worst, but where's the information? How can we safeguard them? How can we help them? There's nothing. At the same time, of course, China is using this opportunity to intensify its crackdown, taking the moment while the world is maybe distracted with emergency responses in our own countries and various places to push forward on policies in Tibet. We're seeing language rights being targeted again. So in Amdo Ngaba and areas of eastern Tibet, where there has long been a threat now for Tibetan children, primary school, middle school children, to lose the right to learn in the Tibetan language, which they thrive and do well learning in their mother tongue. Now there is this news that as of September, maybe a little later, they'll move the medium of instruction to Chinese, to the national language, and Tibetans will again in these areas be at a huge disadvantage, and young children may soon have their right to learn in their mother tongue taken from them. And of course, this makes sense for China to do this, or Chinese authorities, or even the regional authorities to do this now while they think the world is distracted. And so obviously one of our basic responsibilities right now as Tibetans, as Tibet activists, as all of us, is to continue to monitor the situations on the ground inside our various countries and regions, and to continue to, it's just basic, shine the light and make sure that they are not allowed to get away with all of this in the cover of darkness as maybe the world is distracted. That's basic. And the Tibetan nomad activist, community leader, anti-corruption crusader Anya Sanda, who is, his case has been, for a couple of years now, he's been disappeared. He didn't have a trial. Suddenly he was given a trial in December. He's charged with provoking quarrels and causing trouble or something like that, basically for trying to do environmental and anti-corruption actions and organizing. And suddenly, because there was international interest in various embassies, and diplomats were trying to follow his case and cover his case and he was sentenced to 7 years, or 10 years, 7 years in prison, suddenly in December. And then he had an appeal that was pending, and there should have been a court date, and people were interested in going to that in terms of from the embassies and diplomats and people who can go and watch and monitor the situation, and suddenly that was postponed. So his case, the case of language rights, the case of those Tibetans that the handful that we know of for sure have been arrested or detained because of trying to spread information about the COVID-19 or the coronavirus. these are the very basic things we have to continue to do. There's just no way around that. We need to monitor the situation and shine the light and do what no one else is going to do for us inside Tibet. But I would say, just as a broad thing, speaking to sort of what Sharon was saying just now, I mean, this is an incredible moment. And I know we're all mad and frustrated and upset with the Chinese authorities that it has gotten this bad, and that, now the whole world, our lives and well-beings and livelihoods are all at risk now because of this terrible authoritarian regime that rules over China and these occupied territories and places. But the moment is incredible for like never before, where China is at the center of the critical eye, of the world. And there will be a reckoning. There will be the post-pandemic reckoning, where governments and society, people, intellectuals, academics, the media, where citizens, where we will all be, asking the questions: how did this happen? Why did this happen? What is, what should be the role of China in all of and what should our relationship with China be moving forward on so many different levels, economically, politically, with all of our, at least, free and open societies. And I can guarantee you that the Chinese government is not going to handle this well. They're trying, they're scrambling, they think they know how to do this mass diplomacy and whatnot, and we all get upset even thinking about it. But trust me, they are who they are. They cannot change it, and they will botch it. They're already, with these wolf warrior, wolf diplomacy, they're already angering and upsetting the international community with these ambassadors and mid-level Chinese diplomats who are taking their lead from Xi Jinping, Xi Jinping from his leadership, and going out and attacking their host countries for even questioning or wanting to know what happened in the early stages of the outbreak. Why did this happen? Any question that any responsible nation state or actor would ask. These, Chinese ambassadors and mid-level diplomats are upsetting and angering their host countries and citizens globally by acting in this really aggressive manner that is meant to sort of push back on this narrative that China, has responsibility here. But actually, they are doing what they always do for us, which is the greatest disservice to themselves. Because in the post-pandemic reckoning, this will not be good for them. And we need to, as Tibetans, as activists, as all of us working on these issues related to China, we need to be there from now until that time to be able to continue to push what we know to be true, which is that as long as this Chinese Communist Party, this one-party state exists, and these occupied peoples, in Tibet and East Turkestan, continue to be subjugated in the way that they have been in Hong Kong, Hong Kongers are not allowed to have freedom and whatnot. As long as this continues, the world will remain threatened. As long as Xi Jinping and this Chinese Communist Party is allowed to move forward unhindered and given the legitimacy by international community and government, we will all remain under risk and under threat. I'll just stop there. So Dursa, that was a bit too long.
No, I think that's amazing. Thank you, Lhadon, for nailing it. I think you said at the end, as long as this state party exists, the world won't be free from the threat. And of course, people are suffering in China and in all the occupied territories. So I think we are getting questions now. And I will take the first question, which is for Sharon, but I want to link that with where Lhadon had left, and Sharon, you had also touched earlier. So you said that the vulnerability of the regime, how the Xi Jinping regime handled this situation, and how vulnerable they are. And we also hear Xi Jinping himself has acknowledged that coronavirus situation, coronavirus incident is one of the most dangerous, or like, something that party consider most threatful for the party since the foundation of the party. So my question is Xi Jinping is in problem? Because we hear like one of his, like, top leader,
One can only
vice
hope.
minister,
No.
yeah, vice minister of the public security get arrested. There are a lot of things happening. So you are a China watcher, so we want to have a little bit more information on that. And then I want to add that with the question from Yang Chen Doga, who is asking you, can you share some insight into the mainland Chinese people's current state of mind, especially those who suffer tremendously as a result of COVID-19, as there are like protests happening in mainland. So yeah, with one is like the state of the regime, and other is the state of the people, like how they are, seeing it. Sharon, please.
Yeah. Okay. So I also see related to that question by Dokar is a question also on whether we can trust, as Hong Kongers, can we trust China to give us the question is to give us the required freedom for Hong Kong's democracy. And that question was also, do you really have confidence on the one nation, one country, two systems? Is that deserving? And is that the vision of Hong Kong? So maybe I'll do a little bit of touch on both of them. Okay, so the question about state of mind. First of all, it's that we when we ask the question of what do the people think on the ground, we first have to recognize, as I'm sure we all do, and I know Dokar recognizes, and she just wants an opportunity to open this up, is that there is tremendous monitoring, surveillance at both a technical level, a legal, criminalizing a lot of perfectly legitimate expression. So in that context of comprehensive surveillance, monitoring, information control, online as well as offline, because then we have to think, how are we to know what people think? So the people who try to express anything that is in contrast, in contradiction with what is permissible, and we know what's permissible because Xinhua and the official media outlets will tell you what is permissible in terms of the story, in terms of what facts can be reported, indeed, what are facts. So anyone who speaks in a voice that's like, no, that's not true, or maybe even if that were the facts, I have a different analysis of those facts, anything different from that, so we need to start with recognizing that anyone who expresses that puts himself or herself and their family and their groups and their communities at substantial risk on the mainland. Having said that, what we should just be in awe of is that people are still speaking out, and we're getting them. And so in Wuhan, there's a series of people publishing on different platforms that then we can get access to, like Wuhan Diaries, like the diaries of what was happening inside during it. You're also seeing, despite the complete effort to control the narrative, China's trying to control the COVID-19 narrative, despite that domestic control and despite its exporting that narrative, it's having some trouble domestically. Why? Because you can lie and you can tell that narrative abroad, but if you try to give a narrative at home, people see people dying, people see the bodies, people see who's getting sick, and that's not only your own family members, but the medical workers see what the condition and the situation is. But for the Wuhan Diaries, if you're a follower, HRIC is compiling what we call these voices that are not the official voices. And we're doing it first only in Chinese because we feel that it's really important for Chinese people in the mainland to hear that they're not alone and that other people are seeing this reality and speaking out. The second thing that we were seeing, despite the situation that I just described, is that there were efforts made online to commemorate the death or to honor the deaths of Dr. Li Wenliang as the first whistleblower, and to say how important that is. That means people recognize that there was a cover-up, and they recognize that this disaster. So why is the wolf warrior approach being pulled out? It's because in this context, the party state only has one kind of card to play now, in addition to the repression, the hard tactics. They're pulling out nationalism. They're trying to really stoke up the nationalism, and that, and particularly in the context of the U.S.-China trade dispute, they really can stoke it up and say, look at the U.S., they're doing a terrible job, and they're trying to blame us, and now they're going to punish us. And they're also stoking the language of war, and that this is a war, and in a war, the people must come together, and the war, we as Chinese are going to show how strong we are as Chinese, and we're going to survive, and we're going to beat this enemy. And we're seeing that elsewhere as well. So I think the mostly important thing is for us to listen, and then not HRIC and many other groups who are not alone are also trying to amplify, that information and the voices and the different stories that are trying to be told in terms of on the mainland. Then I just want to quickly, because I think it's such a good question about the one country, two system, and I thank the person for the question, and if they want, they can repeat the question if they want to write it in Chinese, because I think there might have been some lost in translation points. But so in English, let me say this. When we talk about one country, two systems, and do we think that's like the best thing? No, that was the promise that was made in 1984, and between the UK and the People's Republic of China. And so under that deal, the deal was that one country, two systems would work if we kept them separate, and that Hong Kong would have meaningful autonomy. So 1997 rolls around, and we saw that picture well before 1997, and we started seeing, why did anyone ever think that Beijing would allow within its sovereignty a special administrative region which would have meaningful autonomy? They didn't allow the TAR, the Tibetan Autonomous Region. They didn't allow the XUAR, the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. That they didn't even get that kind of, a meaningful governance at that level, at the region level. So what we've seen in Hong Kong is the problem with one country, two system was baked in. When you have one of those systems, an authoritarian regime, and the other system is one that has law, has rule of law, has aspirations for democracy, and the other difference is a people who expect and have a whole way of life and language and culture and values that is ours, and we're not going to just give it up. And so the same thing that we're seeing with Tibetans and Uyghurs, the Sinicization, making them more Chinese. Ironically, they're saying the same thing with Hong Kongers. They're saying the problem with Hong Kongers is we're not Chinese enough. And what is happening is in Hong Kong, part of that struggle that we should understand, it's not that we're rejecting this or that. It's that as a people, we have a right to determine who we are, what is that culture? What does it mean to be a Hong Konger? What does it mean to be Chinese? What does that mean? And it's not for Xi Jinping to define that, because that's what he's doing. He's defining Chineseness for 1.4 billion people. He's defining it for all the people. So when we say confidence, I'll put out something and I'll go out on a limb here. It's that one country, two system could work. And the way it could work is that we begin by not accepting the current, and I'll say this carefully, that the current party state regime and its current form and its current functioning is inevitably going to be the form the governance and the way that the country of China is governed. And that's what Deng Xiaoping probably was hoping, that there would be some catching up, and that out of economic reforms, there might be some not such big difference. So I think why we believe that it's so important to support the rights and the rights and the calls for democracy, for their right to participate and to decide and determine what the policies are on the mainland. Because if the mainland becomes more and engages in other forms of reforms that look like it might have been possible 25 years ago, but now we're all assuming, I think too easily, the China watchers, of which I'm not one, I'm not a China watcher, is that the China watchers are, even they now are saying, let's not start with the scenario that Xi Jinping scenario, even for life, is inevitable, is the only scenario, and that there's not already rumblings that maybe not only is he viewed as mishandling Hong Kong, but that he also massively mishandled COVID-19 and has created this enormous problem globally, which is backwashing into the regime. So I think one thing about this one country, two system is, number one, and as many of the young people, and certainly Joshua Wong and Demosistos is they're thinking beyond 2047, the end of the 50-year period. We can't think in such short terms. The second thing is we think of alternative scenarios. What if the Constitution gets amended again, the mainland Constitution, and that no term limit is taken out, and they revert back to where there were term limits? What if, so there's a lot of other plausible scenarios that some China watchers are spinning out. And I think we activists need to learn from that and say, wait a minute, why are we assuming the inevitability and the inevitable survival of that regime? And so the second thing I want to say to the question about one country, two systems is, let's change the two systems, not just the one country, because the two systems changing will also change. But Hong Kong is the front line for that democracy battle. If we can't fight and survive with the kind of democracy that we're holding the line for, then I think it's going to be pretty dicey for the mainland. And I have to just, my last, I was in Hong Kong in February, but one of the trips when I went back, I was taken to the airport, and I said to the driver, we had a long, interesting conversation, and I said, so he says, we're not going to win. And I was saying, oh no, you got to redefine victory, and I went through this whole thing. And then he said, no, it doesn't matter. He said, are we even Hong Kongers if we don't just go to our last breath? He said, that's what makes us Hong Kongers. Like, we're not in the battle because we think we're going to win. It's like we have a possibility of winning because we're not giving up. So I think that's really important. And so I don't think it's about confidence in China that they're going to give us our freedom. I don't think it's that at all. I have confidence in Hong Kong people. I have confidence in us. And that's why I think it's inevitable that we will have a different, better, a better system, because I have confidence that, not that I think we're all heroic and that we're all infallible and that we're all amazing. We are, but I think it's because I think we're going to battle it out among ourselves. You see amazing things on the ground that they're still, even under this COVID-19, thinking it through, trying to strategize, struggling for how can we keep working towards, and even last night in the Newtown Plaza, where many horrible clashes have occurred. Last night, what did they say when they left? They said, 5 demands and not one less. That was last night, So I think there is this tremendous spirit of, we're going to get what we were promised, what we are due, what international law protects. And I neglected to say that recently, the international experts a whole group issued a joint statement on Hong Kong and said, you can't invoke national security, terrorism, separatism, and think that just by invoking it, you can now have a carte blanche to trample on protected rights. I'm saying it a little harsher than they said it. Obviously, they said it in a much more technically legal standard way, but I'm saying what I think we need to take away from that is to say that Hong Kong cannot go and now say, as they're threatening, they have an anti-terrorist law, they're now threatening the quote rioters, the people who are going out on the streets and protest because they weren't given the right to peaceably assemble. So they're saying we will start prosecuting them as under the anti-terrorist law. And then they've already brought and arrested someone on the sedition law. So we are seeing that ramping up, and that's why we all have to get much more strategic and also to see who the allies are. And as Hong Kongers, I think we need to see our allies as the mainlanders on the mainland who are at great risk speaking out on COVID-19 and who actually previously at great risk to themselves, at their freedom and their security and their safety, spoke out in support of the Hong Kong democracy movement. So I think part of as a segue to strategy is I think we need to recognize clearly, who our allies are, and that no one's going to give us anything. We're going to get the democracy we fight for and that we protect and that we educate ourselves on and that we protect each and every one of us on. So I just wanted to be clear that we're not expecting anyone to give it to us. It's something we demand and that we're going to take.
Thank you, Sharon, for touching a lot of important points and already covering some of the questions that people had put up here. So next, I want to ask Rushan now, which you had already a little bit covered in your opening remark. So with the coronavirus situation right now, how it is affecting people in East Turkestan, especially detainees who are in the internment. And along with that, there are some questions about the economy campaign, how global multinational companies are investing in occupied territories and how it is affecting our rights there. And I know Uyghurs movement has also made out many statements and worked on the labor camp that are being set up in those internment camp or outside. So can you tell us a little bit on that, and also align with that in terms of what we can do outside? And later on, I will come to Lhadon to, based on Rushan and Sharon, input, what we can do as a global community, some of the campaigns that we can do here. You have the most experience in terms of running the campaign. So yeah, please, Rushan, can you start?
Thank you, and great synopsis from Sharon and Lhadon. Agree with Lhadon when she talked about how so difficult to get any information out of Tibet. It's similar, actually worse situation for East Turkestan. It's East Turkestan and Tibet are like a huge black wok that kept upside down with absolutely no opportunity to shed any kind of light. We are not getting any real information from what is happening down there. It's very difficult to know what sort of horror the people are facing with this current pandemic. First of all, I just want to say something quickly here. As weeks of self-quarantine continuing going by, we cannot help but really feeling grateful for those fighting, having ability to shelter ourselves from the virus here, that people are fighting at the front line, who are risking their lives to keep us healthy, safe, and our shelves stocked. Excuse me. These are the anonymous heroes who deserve our utmost respect and appreciation and care. And among them, we also have some Uyghur doctors and the nurses from our Uyghur community in diaspora also fighting with this frontline battlefield. So I want to show my appreciation. When I think about what's happening in our homeland with COVID-19, especially with the concentration camps housing millions of Uyghurs in East Turkestan, it really worries me. As not to mention the contagious, unsanitary situation of the camps. The millions are suffering inside of those camps, being malnutrition, abused, being sick and weak. And according to the former detainees, the conditions of the camps are absolutely horrific, with poor hygiene and overcrowded situation. And it's dangerous if the virus gets inside of the camps. It's just unimaginable, what kind of situation that's going to bring. The detainees are facing the most vicious and ruthless cruelty while the CCP didn't release the detainees as they claimed to. They said that all these people are studying in a vocational training centers, all graduated and got jobs, but that's all lies. My sister, who's a retired medical doctor, is still missing since September 2018. So are the relatives of hundreds of thousands of the Uyghurs in diaspora. Their whole family members are missing. And hundreds and thousands of the professors, doctors, business people, entertainers, singers, and the elites, the intellectuals of the Uyghurs who doesn't need any kind of vocational training, they are still missing. Not only that, as the world leaders continue their efforts remedying the destruction caused by the virus in their countries, and as the world was closing down factories and the businesses in effort to fight the virus, China did absolutely the opposite. Actually, the Chinese government has taken advantage of this deflection to continue extermination of the Uyghurs in East Turkestan. And the CCP is sending the ethnic Uyghurs, the Uyghur youth, into China proper to open up the factories in cities ravaged by the virus, clearly demonstrating that the Uyghurs' lives don't matter. And by aggressively moving Uyghur youth out of East Turkestan forcibly and speeding up its detrimental actions and practicing the modern-day slavery, actually. We are seeing from the TikTok and the WeChat videos of this kind of move that the Uyghur youth are moving to China proper. Basically, the CCP is taking the Uyghur youth to those factories, the enslaving them. This forced labor has now leaked into the supply chains of the 83 globally renowned companies of the West that operate and sell goods in the democratic countries, like here in the United States. Concurrently, government is offering the lucrative incentives for Han Chinese settlers to move them to East Turkestan, while they are claiming that those Uyghurs are moving out of East Turkestan to offer them a better job opportunities. Yet now they are moving Han Chinese settlers to East Turkestan, offering them the jobs, money, housing, and the land, which was vacated by the millions of the Uyghurs placed in the concentration camps. So what can we do? We need to ask our government representatives, our officials, to take tangible action quickly. As the communities, the Tibetan communities and Hong Kongers and the other democratic Chinese the groups, we must educate ourselves and our communities about the issues facing all of these persecuted groups. We are all in this together as one, and we need to fight for this common decency and for the violated humanity. and collaborate and educate the world about these atrocities currently perpetrated by the Chinese Communist regime, and make it clear that it doesn't stop at the Uyghurs and the Tibetans and the Hong Kongers that they are facing. This is a global threat. The China is a national global threat to every country, every democracy. The collaboration should be continued continuously, and the three individual communities have to support one and the other, the Tibetans and the Uyghurs and the Hong Kongers. We are stronger together when we work together, and we need to encourage this collaboration within each of the communities all around the diaspora. We must willing to spend our efforts mutually advocating. As I lobby, as I always raise my voice, I will raise it for your communities as well, and I would like to ask you to do the same. We just need to keep working, keep fighting. We have a lot of work to do because, as I said, the Western democracy is at threat. The China is basically undermining everything the world worked so hard for past 50 years, 100 years. The never again should follow with real actions, because the never again is happening all over again, looking at what the Uyghurs are facing today. Thank you.
Thank you, Rushan. And yeah, Lhadon, I can see a lot of questions here regarding actions we can take considering the situation based on your experience over the years of campaigning. What are the opportunities, short-term opportunities, long-term opportunities that we need to think about? And I hear from Sharon when she said about the Confucius Institute being shut down in Sweden, the last Confucius Institute in Sweden, and some of the countries who are trying to be careful in the past, but now because of coronavirus situation, people are stepping up, governments are stepping up. So in this situation, what are the actions? What are the things that we need to keep in mind? But I also want to say before Lhadon, speak up here, there are things that we may not be able to share because there are things that we are discussing internally. But I still think that there are a lot of things that people can know and take part in some of the actions that all the guests has, speakers has suggested, and there are a few things that we need to keep in mind. So Lhadon, please.
Yeah, just to build on both what Sharon and Rushan just said, now is, I mean, even before, but now is especially, it is especially obvious, it is the time for us to unite and to work with the other peoples, nations, groups fighting the Beijing regime, to work together and to press our governments and our political leaders in all of our various countries to fundamentally reevaluate our relationship with China and the Chinese government. And that is Tibetans, Uyghurs, Hong Kongers, Southern Mongolians, Chinese Christians and lawyers and rights advocates, and Taiwanese. Taiwan is a huge ally in this battle. And this is an unprecedented time. This is a moment we have to seize to work together, to do kind of what SFT and others have been doing, bringing groups together to make shared strategies and to share information and to share resources, and then go with a very clear political agenda to our national governments, to even our local governments, and to our representatives, members of parliament, and to say, this is the reality. We are the united voices of peoples fighting for freedom and rights. Now you've all seen what the Chinese authoritarian, the threat that they pose just on a fundamental public health basis to the world, this closed system, this authoritarian system, this, non-transparent, non-democratic system. That we want a fundamental reevaluation of our free nations, our democratic nations' engagement with the Chinese government, with the CCP, and that's economic and that's political and, many levels down. What Sharon said, I think this is key for Tibetans, and everybody. I mean, we should not take it as the given truth that this regime is going to be in power forever, that this set of players that we are dealing with now is going to last forever. They're not. And so we need to fundamentally reevaluate our strategies, our basic political positions, and ask, is this nation under this government, going to last? And if not, what do we need to do about, what can we do to help hasten its demise and to rethink our place? What do we want? And if we want freedom, and if we want, what we have been fighting for, I think there has been confusion, but it's basically every Tibetan knows it's clear. We've been fighting for freedom for 70 years. And now is not the time to give up or give in or settle for anything less, I think. It's only becoming more apparent as the days and the weeks and the months go by that the Chinese Communist Party is a bankrupt ideology. They're a threat to the global security. They do not have what it takes to last, though they're doing a good job holding on. But, if we really look deeply, all the rot that is there is going to take them down too. And so we need to ask ourselves, every Tibetan, especially young Tibetans who are going to be here for a lot more years and, many more years, and the Tibetans inside with an obligation to the vast majority of Tibetans who actually live in Tibet, not in exile. What is the ideal? What is the goal that we're fighting for? And if it's freedom, and if it's true freedom, then what do we need to do? How do we anticipate the changes that are coming? And what are the things that we can do? It doesn't mean we can't all work together, but we do need to reevaluate and rethink, what is this all about? And anything is possible. And I think that that's the crazy thing about a devastating moment like a global pandemic that is taking lives that never needed to be lost. But the truth is that China has, the Chinese government is constantly sabotaging itself. That the nature of this closed, non-democratic, authoritarian, totalitarian system is they're doing themselves in a way, in the long term, and in their relationships with all of these free and democratic countries in the global community. And we need to be the ones there pushing, helping to educate people about what this regime is really about, and also about what we really want and how we are united and working together with all these frontline communities. And finally, I would say there are so many things I could say. There's the Tibetan Policy Act. There's advocating for Tibetans who are fighting for language rights, like Tashi Wangchuk or Anya Sangda, or we need to fight the language battle in Tibet. There are many different campaigns and battles that we need to be engaged in. But what I would say is, for all the Tibetans who are feeling the intensity, the anger, the frustration, the stress of this moment, actually, we need to change our focus a bit and see that there is opportunity here. This is a moment, and we need to be involved. And when I say involved, I mean all these young Tibetans in high school and college and out in the workforce, and professionals who are earning good money. Support the movement. Be involved in the movement. Be involved in a political group. Get involved in lobbying. If you've never done it, learn how to do it. Go to SFT's Action Camp. If that's not right for you, the Youth Congress, Tibetan Youth Congress, the Tibetan Women's Association, or maybe you start your own group, whatever it is. There are plenty of things for us to do. We don't have enough people to do them with. And that's what we need. We need, we've been fighting for so many decades. Our elders before us, my father, grandfathers, grandmothers, our parents. Now it's our turn, from those of us in the sort of 40, 30, 20, age range. Now it's our turn to lead this struggle and to be involved. And I feel like now there's more opportunity than there ever was for them, the giants, the shoulders that we stand upon. They beat a path and a road, kept us moving alive in the darkest days when no one was listening. Now everyone's kind of listening. So let's do something. Let's leverage this moment and not let it go to waste by being involved. And there's no magic potion. There's no magic pill that's going to quickly solve it all. Everyone wants an easy answer. There are no easy answers, but grassroots activism and advocacy and the hard work that Rushan is doing and Sharon is doing in their communities, and some, in our community have been doing for so long, that's what we need to do. And if you can't do it on a daily basis, you got to fund it. You got to pay other people to do the work, because the Chinese government spends a lot of money to keep our people and our country occupied, and employs a lot of people full time to keep Tibetans subjugated. And our own people, especially in exile, who are making good money and working good jobs and who have actually benefited from their life in exile now they need to give back, not just to social welfare activities and not just to religious activities, but to the political movement. That is essential right now. Everyone has a role to play.
Thank you, Larilla. That's been very inspiring, and I know a lot of comments are coming in. I saw around almost 200 comments are there. As we are now running out of time, but I think you have covered a lot of topics that has been already question that has been already raised. And I know there are ways to further communicate to other people, but let's take a time to maybe to have some final remark from each one of us, and then since you have seen some questions on the live Facebook page, if you want to answer and touch those questions, I'm happy with that. Yeah, so I'll just let it be whatever you think that you want to let people know. Maybe Sharon, you wanna go ahead?
Me? Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Okay, thank you so much. I think SFT has always been at the forefront of creative use of technology, and one of the collateral benefits of us being those of us who have had to stay at home for more than 2 months is that some of the old people, not young people like you people, some of us have really had to ramp up our technological capacities and ability to use different tech. So I think one of the benefits is coming out of this for the movement is that we're going to really see globally, actually, because we've actually been connecting with partners in the region, et cetera, but all remotely, that we're going to actually come out with a stronger organizing capacity in terms of using different tech tools. So I want to address, there was a question that came in that I think is very important, but let me say 3 quick closing comments. One is the front line, yes, everywhere, and particularly for us in the epicenter, and that's now we're at plateau and supposedly, is that the front line, we really say a lot about, and I want to echo Rushan's that we just want to honor, just how they've made our life possible going on. I also want to acknowledge at the same time, though, and that perhaps is a topic for another discussion, is the really alarming rise of anti-Asian violence and racism in the U.S. And that's not new. That's been here, but the I think both enabled by from the top the kind of racist and out of control comments and dog whistles, etc., is actually unleashing some very, in some cases, violent attacks on Asians, including frontline medical workers who are coming off shift on working in a hospital. So I think that's something that we need to look at going forward. The second thing is looking at post, COVID-19. The 2 aspects we've talked about is, yes, I think we need to have accountability. We need to, it can't just say it's over, let's move on. And the second reason we need to look back and get a clear what happened analysis is because we need to have a better response next time, and we have to be able to be better prepared. And also looking at now, with respect to Hong Kong, is that the U.S. government, under its Hong Kong Policy Act, is due for a report, upcoming their, sort of report on Hong Kong, and we are confident and we hope that it will be an even stronger message that the assessment of Hong Kong's autonomy, which needs to be done in that report, that they actually not express just alarm, but they follow the concern and alarm with some really concrete actions. The UK needs to step up and do more at this point for Hong Kong, because they're the party to the 1984 Joint Declaration, which is still a legally binding treaty. And so while former officials, governors in Hong Kong have spoken up and individual parliamentarians have spoken up, I think the UK government must really speak up as the UK government. And then what I said about needs to be done about countering the dominant China, the party state narrative, we need to counter that. And because the way we accept that narrative shapes and limits the way we can think of alternative scenarios, alternative strategies. That's why it's critical, not only because the narrative is the party state narrative, but because it's limiting our ability to strategize, and it's limiting the response of like governments and media, etc. So one place to start, I would suggest, and I just made the mistake myself, is that we pay attention to how we speak about, so there's the country of China. And I think we should separate that from Chinese, and we should separate that from Chinese people, and we should separate that from the party state, because what Xi Jinping is doing and what the Communist Party does is put them all together so that the party speaks for what is Chinese people, so they can say you hurt the feelings of the Chinese people. They conflate all of it, and what we need to do in our strategy is pull it all apart. And then, so finally, I want to address the question that was posed, to lead a campaign or struggle. I think there should be a leader. This is the question: who can lead like Nelson Mandela, South Africa, Mahatma Gandhi of India, etc. And are there any leaders who can lead Hong Kong to the democratic struggle or an independent state from China? The problem with this regime is that they don't let such leaders lead easily and crush them or put them in a 10-year imprisonment. So this is why the question is, the movement for democracy and for the future of Hong Kong, in Hong Kong, is a leaderless movement, but it's not an unfocused movement. So it is leaderless and focused. It is leaderless and it's focused. And why I think it's kind of an era-defining struggle, because all the other struggles had a powerful, charismatic leader who paid a price, the ultimate price, if we think Martin Luther King. But even for leaders, those struggles for Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement in the US didn't succeed only because of one leader. It's because people of different classes and ethnicities and went on the freedom rides and white ministers to be killed and murdered for standing with the Black people in the South struggle. So it happened because people across race, across class, across, beliefs and faiths came together and supported the movement and paid price, the ultimate price. In Hong Kong, we're seeing a mobilization that hasn't really it's intensified. So you have more than 60, 70 new unions. That means whatever happens after post-COVID-19, we have an even more organized civil society, but they're organized within constituencies, social workers, medical workers, civil servants. These different sectors are mobilizing to unionize, and they're going to be able to respond then as like different communities coming together. And the key to watch for Hong Kong is that there are leaders that we see, like you see in the West, like you see leaders from the entertainment sector, Denise Ho, you see Joshua Wong from Democistos, you see the young democratic activists like Nathan Law and Alex Chow and all of those abroad. We see them, but they are not, and they themselves are very careful to say, we are not the leaders. We are playing an important role. We are playing certain leadership roles, but they're not only the leaders who are going to make the movement succeed in Hong Kong. And that's why it's era defining. It's going to show that a movement can function with many different leaders stepping up to take those roles and to take it where it can go. And it's coordinated and it's respectful the different strategies are shared and they're different and also being organized, but acting together. So you see, as I mentioned earlier, the demands are still the same. We want an independent commission of inquiry into that rampant police violence and abuse of law. We want the people who have been arrested, thousands, to be released and also have all charges dropped. We want, the universal suffrage. So all of the demands from the beginning to now remain the same, and they're still saying that. And that's the unity. Our demands are unified. The strategies are different, but we also are very cautious and careful not to fight among the strategies. And the strategies are very creative. It's reaching into the economic sector, like the yellow circle, the yellow businesses that support the movement. And the last thing I want to say is we should not be saying, let's return to normal. Carrie Lam, the chief executive, says, let's get on with business and return to normal. We're hearing it outside in the world. Let's return to normal. I take the position we don't want return to normal, because the normal in Hong Kong was only benefiting a very small political economic elite and the tycoons. The normal in the world, as we're now seeing, was not working. The economic order was only benefiting a certain sector. And that now we see that the social structure, the massive inequalities have resulted in why COVID-19 is going to hit much more drastically the vulnerable. And that would mean migrants and refugees, sub-Saharan Africa. And in New York City, we're seeing a higher percentage of African Americans, and immigrants. So let's be very clear that what we're aiming for post-COVID-19 is not a return to the global order that was not serving the public needs of the world, the human needs, and protecting our benefits. And I think that's true in the US and it's true in Hong Kong. We don't want to go back to a Hong Kong that was controlled by tycoons and triads and Beijing. We want a different normal. And that normal is what we are going to have to build together. But I really think we should give up on this and we reject a return to the old normal, because that old normal was terrible.
Thank you, Sharon, so much. That's amazing, Mark. And whenever I hear Sharon, it excites me to, take action. Of course, right now there are a lot of things we can do. Even though we are activists, we are all the time in the street. We cannot go in the street, but still there are a lot of things we can do. I'm going to share a few of action steps later on. So next, can Rushan, please, can you give the closing remark?
Okay, thank you. Wow, Sharon, that was great. I don't know how to follow that. Well, when we look at right now, the most frustrating thing for us is not that the world is not only turning a blind eye to China's genocide in East Turkestan, but also China's getting rewarded. When you look at the China's being rewarded by the Beijing Olympics, and look at what's happening with 5Gs right now. Excuse me. When I look at the East Turkestan situation right now, those outside of the camps suffer under the world's worst Orwellian mass surveillance police state. And the Tibet is not any better, and Hong Kong. Right now, not only that the world is turning a blind eye to what's happening in East Turkestan and the Tibet and Hong Kong, but they are actively investing in China's Communist Party controlled Huawei-like companies and inviting those companies to build 5G infrastructure in Western democracies. One would think that the China that instills such a fear in millions of Uyghurs and the Tibetans who cannot even use the cell phone to talk freely with their relatives abroad, for the Uyghur situation right now. If they do, then the relatives are sent to the camps, the concentration camps. That would not be the same China that's going to be the main supplier of the telephones to the world. And I'm just at loss for words when I see It's really difficult to understand how the Western democratic countries are rewarding China by inviting its mass surveillance tech companies who are complicit with genocide to build their very own next generation of telecommunications, the backbone. I wonder, the case of China, I wonder whether the numbers of the people in the concentration camps today would have reached into the millions. Now we have about 3 million. If the world would have acted early on, when the Uyghur intellectuals, such as like Yalkun Rozi and the others, were among the first ones to be imprisoned in 2016. But the world has failed to act even now when there are over 3 million people are in the camps. We have been asking for the implement of the Global Magnitsky Act and impose sanctions to the Chinese officials who are responsible for this atrocity. That's not happening. By waiting so long to act, China's actions in East Turkestan now includes every single act that listed in 1948 Genocide Convention, each of which the world, including the Chinese regime, is obligated to prevent. Now, since China was given the honor of hosting the Winter Olympic 2022, it is important to highlight the working values of the Olympic Games, as they are not compatible with China's governing principles. The values of the Olympic Games, what are they? They are universality and the solidarity, unity in diversity, and the good governance and sustainability. The International Olympic Committee must safeguard those principles that the Olympic built upon. The Olympic Games is a unique international event, and it's not about trade or politics. It's not about which country has the most power or the money. The Olympics are about people coming together to celebrate their differences. Right now, a country that has banned cultural identity and the language, banned religion, enforced policies that is repressing the women and the putting over 500 children in the concentration in the state-run orphanages, and 3 million people in the concentration camps because of their ethnicity, does not respect those values. China having the Beijing Olympics is like a repeat of 1936 games in Berlin, where Hitler announced to the world the opening of the competition. It's putting in a question the values of the Western democracies and the overall conscience of the humanity. So we campaign for Uyghurs, calls on the international community to take actionable steps to hold China accountable, not only for the crimes against the Uyghurs, the genocide against the Uyghurs, but for its lack of transparency in regards to coronavirus and the other crimes against humanity that they are doing in Hong Kong, in Tibet. It's time for China to take responsibility for its actions, that not be rewarded with hosting Olympics. Whoever leaked those 3 sets of CCP's documents did so in the hope that their actions would be catalyzed for a significant change when they are risking their lives. That should have been a wake-up call for everybody's eyes. And it's time for the world to act bravely. It's time to stop CCP, time to stop the Holocaust of my people. We are all responsible for what happens next. We call for the ultimate freedom for East Turkestan, Tibet, and Hong Kong. Now it's time to fight together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for the amazing remark. And you also stress about, you always been stressing about how important to work together. And since I came to know you, it's been over, I think, a year now. We had the opportunity to work together. It's a great honor and privilege, and we look forward to furthermore of partnership and working together. And Ladula, can you please have your closing remark?
Yeah, I mean, I think There is no doubt that this is an extremely painful moment for everybody, very personally. And then, especially, I was just looking at the comments, especially for Tibetans with family and close friends, but really family back home in Tibet who they can't talk to properly, even if they get to have contact, which is, an amazing development that didn't used to be the case not too long ago. But that contact is so limited by what they're allowed to talk about and where the dangerous topics are. And you can't go here, you can't go there. You just have to, somebody said, you can just ask what you're eating, how are you doing, this very basic kind of questions. I think that really the hope lies with us and the people inside. And as Rushan just pointed out, somebody at the highest level access in the Chinese Communist Party or some official, I'm always thinking it's got to be a very high level Uyghur, but maybe it was a Chinese official, leaked those documents to let the world know exactly what was happening inside East Turkestan, and to let the world know exactly what the Chinese government was planning and doing and carrying out against those people. These women, mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, Rushan's own sister, So somebody did such a brave act. Those Uyghurs inside, even though they're being watched and monitored every second, they're sending messages out to the world. They're letting people outside know what's happening in very creative ways, using technology in very creative ways. Hong Kongers, despite unbelievable kind of street level repression tactics, like we just don't really see that often in the world, so on display as was in the movement that's, happened over last summer and into this year. Hong Kongers who really have been quite, well off in the big scheme of things in the world, sacrificed everything. Young people sacrificed everything, their futures, to go and to fight for what is right, and to fight for their freedom. The same is true in China. Media, journalists, citizens, people who are part of the party or part of the ruling, establishment, speaking out and risking everything. Inside Tibet, it is true too. Tibetans constantly show us that courage and strength is not limited to just, one remarkable person here or there, but to many. And there is, even in this moment, Tibetans have this like self-reliance kind of idea. We're eating tsampa to stay strong. We're eating Tibetan roasted barley flour. We know how to last for a long time at home on very little food. We have the hearty, Tibetan national food in tsampa. We have our religion, our faith, our spiritual practice, each other. There's something that's there, even despite all of the repression, even despite the unbelievable violence and fear that the Chinese Communist Party and the government in Beijing brings down upon people, even in a moment like this. You have to fear the virus, but you also have to fear, ending up in prison for talking about health and sanitary, tips to sanitize your home or protect yourself from getting sick. So there are just so many remarkable acts of courage despite the unbelievable repression. And I think for those of us who live in freedom and who have resources, who have this movement, who have each other, who have this technology and all these tools that make us privileged, we just need to act. And we need to act together. We need to stay the course, keep up the good fight, and also look at re-evaluating what we're doing and how we can push harder, how can we can use stronger language, how can Tibetans, like in the US, say, for example, or in Canada where I was born and raised, how can we look at the governments that represent us now here and say, we want you to reevaluate your position on Tibet. This cannot just be a static thing. The US government has a position on Tibet that you've had for X number of years, and it should be revisited This idea that Tibet has always been a part of China, this language that's used, while we recognize Tibet has always been a part of China, we want the Chinese to do X, Y, and Z. It's time to revisit that. It's time for us in this changing political landscape where we don't have to risk our lives to ask for these things or to do these things. We just need to be bold, and we need to go to the people in power and to say exactly what Sharon said. There's no return to normal after this. We need new ways of doing things, new ways of looking at these issues, and that includes the fundamental question of Tibet as a part of China, East Turkestan under the Chinese government, Hong Kong as a totally failed idea of this one party, two systems. Clearly that doesn't work. So what's new? How do we change this? And also, of course, for considering other groups, and especially considering Taiwan as a key strategic ally at this moment. So it's really up to us to do the work, and we don't have to risk our lives to do it here. So it really shouldn't be, there shouldn't be many barriers. It's just how much we can imagine, envision, how bold and creative we want to be or can be. And I think a moment like this says, hey, all bets are off. Let's, think big, and let's push for the maximum, and let's not be afraid. We don't have to, in a way, be afraid anymore of stepping on people's toes who say that China is the global partner that we have to all move forward with into the future, the Chinese Communist Party, this is who we've got, so we got to work with them. Maybe that's not true anymore, and that's something that we shouldn't be afraid to discuss and to reimagine our world. Like Sharon said, let's reimagine this world and our movement and our national struggle as Tibetans. And let's take our strength and our inspiration from the people inside, because there's plenty of strength and inspiration that we can draw from there.
Thank you, Lhadon. This is a great way to conclude our discussion here. But I also want to shout out on one of the live viewer who has been posting many important comments here. So Tundu Sringla, our friend and activist, has been watching live discussion throughout, and we know Tundula is one of the activists who has been working so hard throughout the years, and Tundula basically put out this information about when we talked about take action. So there's a act right now, Tibet Policy Act 2019, which has gained majority, a lot of support from the Congress, and now it's on the Senate. And we want everyone. We have right now 142 live viewer. Please visit ICT website, and you can find a petition link where you can sign, and you can write to if you are Tibetan American or American here, you can write to your senator. We have right now 16 senators who have co-sponsor, but we need more. And this is a time when we say it's an opportunity. These are the action we need to take. It might take 5 minutes. It may seem like a small action, but we need to know that small action lead to big result. So big kind of achievement. So this is something that I just want to shout out and to say to Tuchena, thank you so much. So yeah, I think this is a very, very important discussion, and I know and I hope that it will help a lot of people to further, think about what we need to do, and to get more information about our movement and work. You can visit our website. You can visit Human Rights in China website to get more information and update. Human Rights in China sent a weekly update on situation in China. There are some questions about what is happening in China. You must sign up for that weekly update. And I think it's a daily and weekly update. I think it's a very good way to get the information. And then you can also visit campaigns for Uyghur, which is the Rushan organization. You can also visit World Uyghur Congress to further information about the Uyghur movement. And also you can visit Uyghur Human Rights Project, right? These are the main organization where you can have all the resources. You can contact Rushan for further information for the movement. And again, you can visit Tibet Action Institute for more information about what is happening. And especially Tibet Action Institute had worked on and made many materials on the current situation on coronavirus impacting Tibetan lives. And also there were many materials in Tibetan language, so please do that. And also in terms of digital security, it's a leading organization that has been helping Tibet groups and also organizations around the world. And finally, you can also visit Students for Free Tibet for more information. You can also share SFT Facebook page to others. And as you were mentioning, I think all of us, we had share a common kind of idea about importance of working together and believing in ourselves. Of course, like things are changing. Governments and leaders are like, becoming more cautious and trying to deal China stronger. But at the same time, at the end, we were able to keep this movement alive because of our work, because of people on the ground. So I think we have to trust our work. We have to trust that we can do it, no matter how powerful China seems like. But now, right now, the things are changing. Now China doesn't look at all like powerful. Things are crippling out, and it is an opportunity, and we need to believe in that. And SFT, it's been over, I think, 3 years. We had particularly, adopt this project of building alliance with other movements in a very, very important way. We had our first Hong Kong, Tibet, Taiwan Youth Activist Conference in Taiwan in 2017. We met with the leader of the Sunflower Movement. We met with the leader of the Umbrella Movement, and we learned from each other's movement. And then we also had second conference in US in DC, where we also met with the Uyghur leaders. So for the last 3 years, we want to build this activist network, and we represent each other. Whenever we have this opportunity, we care not only about our movement, also about other issues. And when we are united, we are stronger. And of course, China doesn't want that. That's why I think we should further work to that. And having said that, I think it is important to hear the new generation activists and leader. So for the next episode, we are trying to call youth and student activists from Taiwan, from Hong Kong, from Uyghur movement, from Tibet movement, to further share what the new generation think and where the new generation want to lead the movement. And I think it's amazing that we are together. I again want to thank you all for your time. And if you can wait for a minute, I just want to have one last announcement that SFT is working right now. So it is about.
Joseph, and just quickly, I want to just thank you for your leadership. You guys have been doing a great job. So I wanted to say thank you. Really excellent work.
Thank you,
yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I think for 164 live viewers and those people who will watch this video again, as we said, we need to stand together. We need to support together in our work in fighting for our freedom. It is also time to stand with our own community, people who are in need. And as we know that New York has been completely devastated by the coronavirus and has become an epicenter. And Queens, particularly, as Sharon mentioned, has one of the hardest regions to affect. And we know that in terms of community, whenever this situation happens, communities, immigrants community and refugee communities are people who face most challenge. And our majority of Tibetans lives in Queens. And what we have seen since the lockdown, it is challenging for Tibetans, but Tibetans are coming together. Tibetan community here in New York, New Jersey, and Tibetan member of Tibetan Women Association, other NGOs, everyone is coming together to help Tibetans who are sick. There is a Tibetan Nurse Association who has been helping really good for people who need help setting up online call in Tibetan language, not only Tibetans, but also Himalayan communities, Nepalese communities. So I think it is amazing to see that. I think this gives me hope. And but at the same time, it is challenging time because a lot of problem has also faced in terms of economy, our community center, which our leaders and elders had built so much, worked so much throughout the year. And it's amazing community center. I think, Sharon, you have been there, right? But at the same time,
It's amazing.
because of the coronavirus, it's been shut down for the last 2 months. and there are a lot of the loan that we need to be paid, and the operation cost is around like 50K, which is quite a lot, but it's a big community. But since it's been shut down, the main source of income, having like these events like on weekends where a lot of people use the community center, we are not able to do that. So because of that, community is right now facing a lot of challenge in terms of the financial, and then also community is taking a lot of initiative. Even despite this challenge, what I really like is, even despite this financial challenge, what they thought about is how they can help the members. What they thought is how they can feed the frontline communities. I think this is a really compassionate act, and when people do that, I think it's our responsibility to step up and help. So with the help of SFT members and supporters, we had just launched a GoFund fundraising for the Tibetan community to support. I will just quickly share the yeah, I think we are on right now. So I'm sharing. I'm doing a screen sharing of my my computer, so people will now see my screen where I had opened up the Tibetan community in New York. I mean the fundraiser on GoFundMe. Just wait a second. Okay, yeah. Now I think people can see it. So you can see here, we just launched it, I think an hour or 2 hours ago, and it is the name, I mean the title, New York Tibetan Community Needs Your Urgent Help, and you can see pictures and videos below how community are helping the frontline communities, doctors and nurses, providing fresh food from community kitchens, providing momos to them, and then as I said, this is a community center. It's not just for event, but it's a home, because there are a lot of religious activities, a lot of culture activity, and one special thing is we have a weekend school, right? Which many of our leaders had worked over, I think, 30 years to make that school. And right now, community center, Tibetan community has over 400 Tibetan students. Imagine 400 young Tibetan students coming to the center every weekend to learn about Tibetan culture, identity. And since the coronavirus situation emerged, this center has been shut down. But we want to reopen the center as soon as possible when things change. But in order to do that, we need fund. And because we are still concerned the lockdown may continue, and there's a shortage of income as well. So we don't want to completely in a situation where we cannot run this community center. So we urgently, set up this fundraising. You can see the community center here, and a message from the community president, Sonam Gapela, for the fundraiser. So yeah, this is a quick announcement for the live viewer and people who will watch later on. So please visit the GoFund, and please visit SFT Facebook page. You can also look into Tibetan Community New York, New Jersey Facebook page. You will find the link. Please donate whatever amount you can. All donation counts. Every single dollar counts. And if you can't donate, please share it with your members and supporters, with your friends. So that's all I have to say for now. I again want to thank Sharon, Rushan, and Lhadon for your leadership, for your work, and thanks for joining SFT Live.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Stay
you.
strong, everybody.
Thank you, Georgie.
Stay
Yes,
strong.
thank you. Take good care, everyone. Yes.
Yeah,
Stay
you too,
safe and
Sharon.
healthy.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye.